Welcome all of you. This is Kanishk. We are starting the American Revolution today for your GS paper 1 of UPSC. And American Revolution is a very important historic event. It's lasted from 1775 to 1781, and it was fought between Great Britain and 13 British colonies at the North American continent. Just a few chronologies you need to know that in 1607 Jamestown was set up by British in America. It was the first British colony in America, named after King James of England. That's why it was called Jamestown. And the very next year, in 1608, William Hawkins, one of the representatives of East India Company, visited India in the court of Jahangir, the Mughal emperor. And between 1607 to 1732, there were 13 such British colonies. The last one was Georgia. So it took them little less than 150 years, 150 years, less than 150 years to make 13 colonies in what we today know as United States of America. These were the colonies: the New Hampshire, New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. As I told you, the last one was Georgia. Just like in India, we had viceroys and governor generals to look into the Indian affairs. In Britain, in America, there was a British appointed governor who looked after the administrative and commercial issues in 13 colonies. And politically, Americans were deprived of any representation at the highest level, and they demanded their version of Swaraj. Okay, they demanded representation of the home rule. And England was a conservative society with an elitist mindset. They had the notion that we developed America, it's our colony. So you can see the British Queen and the former American president showing his disdain towards, it's just a symbolic one, disdain towards the British policy that it's our colony. No, this is not something that Americans will agree to. And by 17th to 18th century, America it evolved as an open cosmopolitan society, liberal, progressive, materialist, and individual freedom-seeking society. It had a very mixed American culture. Like Americans, who were the Americans? They were the Red Indians, the Aboriginal Red Indians who used to live there since ages, and the different European migrants. Sorry, the different European migrants. Great Britain conquered, won many wars in Europe, took over the areas, and these people were not considered fit enough to live in Britain, so they were taken to what is today known as USA. And because of this mixed culture, no one sect or no one class had an upper hand, and now British were seen as an elite outside force. And as I told you, they were Europeans, so they also had the benefits of Renaissance and Industrial Revolution. So trade and commerce developed between the colonies, which made them interdependent. Proximity increased, and they started developing as a cohesive unit. And the colony rich in any raw material exported it to the colony which needed it, and vice versa. Like if one colony, one of the 13 colonies, was having a rich gold deposit, and the other one had a rich silver deposit, the third one might have been blessed with good dairy sector, so they started trading amongst themselves. Okay, and the British governor who was appointed by the British crown, he was blamed for all the ills of America. Like, we are unable to do this because the British governor forbids us to do that. This was the feeling that the Americans had. John Locke, the famous empiricist, his idea on liberty influenced the Americans. Thinkers and writers always have a great role in shaping any society, or in shaping the narrative of that particular society. You look at the op-ed pages in the newspapers that you read. These are opinions. Okay, so this is what was happening there. Common Sense, a book that was written by Thomas Paine in 1775-76, advocated independence from Great Britain to people in the 13 colonies. So a spirit was building up which wanted Americans to liberate themselves from the British possession. Socially, culturally, ideologically, economically, politically, America emerged as a cohesive group. Okay, and they developed a feeling that British are exploiting them. You see rationalist thoughts emerging, universities coming up, Harvard in 1636 and Yale University in 1701. So universities are places where debates, discourse, and discussions happen, and they started questioning the British possession of these lands, the American lands. And America was evolving into an individual centric materialist society. Now, British were following what is known as mercantilism. Okay, economic exploitation of the colony in order to benefit the Britain. That is what was mercantilism. And they passed a series of acts. One such act was Enumerated Commodities Act of 1660. The colonies, here refers to the 13 British colonies in America, they were compelled to export sugar, it's wrongly spelled as sugar, sugar, tobacco, cotton, indigo exclusively to India, England. And then they passed the Navigation Act in 1651, which mandated Americans to use only British ships for trade. You see, when they use British ships, they have to purchase from Britain. So Britain is increasing its sale, okay, at the cost of America. Staple Act, Indian America trade to happen via Britain, 1663. If Americans wants to trade with India, instead of coming via Cape of Good Hope, they have to first halt at Britain so as to pay excise duty to Britain and then come to India. That would increase their cost, but British would benefit. Enforcement Act, Americans should not smuggle the products banned by Britain. Hat Act, Woolen Act, Iron Act. See, these items could not be imported from could only be imported from Britain and no other place. Like hat, hat was seen as a cloth which gentlemen wear. So Americans wanted to be like their British counterparts. But wool, now it's a cold place. America is a cold place. Iron, as I told you, it was a an emerging industrial uh, emerging industrial place. All the 13 colonies. So iron was needed. Now Britain is mandating that you need to take these items only from us, not from anywhere else. So whatever price the Britain is offering, they have to purchase at that price. If France is offering for less price, or if Spain is offering for less price, Americans don't have that choice because of the acts that is being passed by the Britain. So the seven colonial representatives met at Albany in 1754, and Benjamin Franklin, the famous leader, he asks all of them to unite and put pressure on Britain to stop the economic exploitation of America. And the seven colonial representatives refused Franklin's proposal. They say it's not the right time. Okay, Franklin wanted the seven colonial representatives to unite against the Britain. They said no. No, why? Again, pressure is wrongly spelled here. So why they said no? We'll see that. But the very next day, Franklin ran a newspaper and he published this cartoon with the tagline "Join or Die." It's a snake cut into several pieces, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight pieces, and these are the eight colonies. So if you don't join, you will have to die. Is what the message is being said. So why? The question is why it was rejected. Why was Franklin offer declined by the representative, the colonial representative? Because there was a French problem in North America. France declared that they want to conquer the British colonies in America. A 7-year war was happening, and they also made some foothold in the territory. Now there was a guy Louis XVI. We'll know more about him in the next sessions when we cover the French Revolution. And he declared that he wanted to annex the entire British colonies in America. Americans were apprehensive of France more than Britain. Okay, they were not sure what Louis XVI could do. So they thought it's not the right time, not the opportune time to fight the British, because if they fight British, French might come. So that it's not the right time right now. And after 1760, British wanted Americans to pay for the war expense, the same 7-year war which the England and France had. After the war ended, Americans were asked to pay the war expense. Like, we saved you from France, we saved you from Louis XVI, so pay us. And they started implementing these laws very strictly. The defiance was not punished earlier severely, but now it was. And they again passed the tight control policy of 1762-63. The new PM of Britain, George Grenville, implemented the Crown's proclamations. American cannot cross the Appalachian Mountain. Try locating this on map. Americans can't cross Appalachian Mountain and settle to the west of it. So geographical limitation is being set up. Currency Act. Americans should use pound instead of dollar. So what happens when a country mandates using their currency? It strengthens the home country's currency and it weakens the other currency. So pound is strengthening and dollar is weakening. Quartering Act was passed. Americans should bear the expense of all British soldiers stationed in America. So whatever number of British soldiers are living in America, their उनका पूरा खर्चा पानी Americans को उठाना है. So these two acts further enraged the Americans. Then Stamp Act was passed in 1765. Americans needed to put stamp on all the official documents. This increased their cost, and it was boycotted by the Americans. And then emerged the famous slogan, which later became a war cry, that no taxation without representation. See, this is what happens whenever there's sorry, whenever there is a call for revolution. The first thing that the revolutionaries want is that we want to be a part of the ruling part. We also, you see, India. What happened in India? The earlier version of Congress, led by AOU, Man, WC, Banerjee, and that Gokhale and Tilak's Congress. What they said, they said that we also want to be a part of government. This is what the Americans are saying. This is what the French will say. This is what the Russians will say. So this is one uniform feature. This is how a revolution starts. Americans are also saying that we will not give tax until we get representation, which means sorry, until we get to form the government. Now, Townshend Act was passed in sorry. The Townshend Act was passed in 1767 and tax was levied on essential commodities. Again, there were huge protests because of this very act. Essential commodities refer to the daily use things. So if there are tax on some stuffs that you use regularly, maybe toothpaste, toothbrush, your shaving kit, anything, then of course that will not be a very friendly gesture. Now people protested and they were fired upon on 5th of March 1770 at Boston. Boston is a very famous place in USA, and this firing incidents, people were killed. It is known as Boston Massacre. Tea. See, for most of people, tea is not a drink; it's a sentiment. And the Tea Act said that the only British tea will be purchased by the Americans. The English East India Company in India, they used to send tea to USA from India. So you cannot drink tea from anywhere else except for Britain. This is what the Americans were told. And they decided to boycott the British tea. They did not allow any British ship to enter America and they were sent back. Now, there was this guy called Governor Hutchison. He was British. He decided that he will make sure that tea is unloaded at Boston seaport. He said, bring it on. I'll see how many Americans can come and stop the unloading of ship." So here comes an American, Samuel Adams. He disguised himself as Red Indian. He went to the Boston port with his followers, and what happens is known as Boston Tea Party in the history. They dumped the entire tea in the sea. That is known as Boston Tea Party. 16th December it happened, 1773. Adams and his followers dumped British tea worth 20,000 pounds in the sea, and this is what is known as Boston Tea Party. Britain passed Intolerable Act, and Boston port was closed till the culprits were arrested. No political meetings were allowed, and Americans were asked to compensate for the tea. So British now are becoming more repressive with their policies with respect to Americans. So Americans protested and called a meeting known as the First Continental Congress. King George of America calls it an act of revolt. He calls his army. George Washington takes over the leadership of Americans, and they declare their independence on 4th of July 1776. Lord Cornwallis finally he surrenders. He was fighting from the side of British at Yorktown in 1781, and he signs a treaty. You will read more about this Lord Cornwallis in modern India and see the newspapers of that time. Yorktown is won. Cornwallis sword was taken over. So they are handling it to the Americans. It was big. The sun never sets in the British Empire. It was said because somewhere on the globe, Britain already has a had some territory. That is why the sun never set in their empire. So what were the consequences? It was a war between imperialist and nationalist, which was won by nationalists, and it set the age of revolution started. See, revolution is very contagious. Okay, it is very infectious. What happened in Middle East in 2011? Jasmine revolution occurred in the Tunisia. Jasmine is the national flower of Tunisia. This question has been asked in your prelims. So, and it engulfed the entire Middle East. Libya, Colonel Gaddafi, the longest serving dictator after 35 years, was killed. Hosni Mubarak, Egypt. So, democracy ushered in, democracy tried to usher. Something similar happened here. In 1789, there was revolution in France, 1798 in Ireland, 1830 the Latin America revolted, and the decolonization process started with American Revolution. Liberty, democracy, self-rule, equal rights, all these terms which are very pleasing to hear, which are very good to be practiced, they were stressed upon. Europe was influenced. Remember, France sent someone to help America. Louis XVI sent General Fight to help Americans. He came back to France and he revolted against the monarchy. We learn about this in French Revolution, and British took their lessons on how to govern colonies. Pitt's India Act was passed in 1784. It was not after a year, it was after some years. So don't note it down. It was passed in 1784 after Regulating India Act. Regulating India Act was passed so that British could manage the company affairs better. After the American revolutions, they needed to pass Pitt's India Act in order to address the shortcomings of Regulating India Act. They were not willing to take any chance. Then they have lost America. They don't want to lose their most favorite colony, India now. So several steps were taken. As I told you, it was a lesson in imperialism for Britain. And Cornwallis was made Governor General of India, and he streamlined the Indian administration. He brought reforms. It often happens. When I used to watch cricket some 5 6 years ago, I always noticed that whenever a batsman was out of form, he toured India and he came back in form. So Cornwallis was also made Governor General of India in order to better his records, maybe. An American Federation was established. That had a profound impact on history. The American story is cherished because there are 13 colonies, 13 diversified colonies, colonies which were inhabited by immigrants. They became one. They became one, and it gave world the first written and democratic constitution. Okay, American Constitution is the first modern democratic constitution of the modern world. Now, there were some constitutional debates. These 13 states were divided into big states and small states. And in 1776, the Continental Congress called upon states to draft the constitution. And all these states were apprehensive, slightly apprehensive of each other. They deliberately created a weak center. They had apprehensions and distrust, as I told you. And all states granted a maximum political and economic power to themselves. So this can't. This is not a favorable condition for the survival of a federation. These were the states, the southern states and northern states on your screen. The northern states were more advanced than their southern counterparts. As you can see, northern states were industrious, advanced, more educated people lived there. They wanted to abolish slavery. They had a protective tariff policy. They favored cheap labor, and they wanted export import to be with the center. The export import or the trade policy to be with the center. The southern states, on the other hand, were agricultural states. They favored slave trade. Now you can see this is what the main contentious issue will be: the slave trade. They favor cheap labor. Southern state wants slaves, and they want open market because of agricultural economy and export import. They want this topic to be with the states, contrary to what the northern states want. They want it to be with the center. So Hamilton Jefferson debate. It is again a very famous debate which happened. Hamilton wanted power to remain with center, what the northern states wanted. The Jefferson, on the other hand, favored power to remain with states. Hamilton was in favor of a republic led by educated elite, shipping and manufacturing based economy. Merchants, lawyers, and investors were the one who favored Hamilton. Of course, they were representing the northern side. On the other hand, Jefferson wanted a democracy of farmers and traders and agricultural based economy, and he was supported by farmers, the southern farmers. So finally, a compromise was reached that national government will look into these matters, or the federal government will look into these matters. The declaration of war, foreign policy, foreign trade, copyright, patent, coins, money, postal offices. States will look into these issues. The local government establishing and maintaining of schools, regulating trade within, elections within, and the public safety. And there will be some issues, some stuffs that will remain within the jurisdiction of the federal government, like the federal taxes, public welfare, criminal justice, borrowing money, roads, banks, so on and so forth. Again, there was a debate: Virginia versus New Jersey Plan, as it is called. Virginia Plan was proposed by Madison. It favored large states and it called for a bicameral legislature. The number of delegates in Congress based on states' population. Congress here refers to the American Parliament. Lower house would elect the upper house. Whereas New Jersey plan was proposed by Patterson, it favored small states, a unicameral legislature. Like in India, we have a bicameral parliament. We have both houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, the upper house and the lower house. Similarly, there are two houses in America, but sorry, but New Jersey plan wanted a unicameral legislature where each state would have a similar number of delegates. Again, this is known as a great compromise. You can see the Venn diagram on your screen. Virginia plan and New Jersey plan. It said that there will be a bicameral legislature, a bicameral Congress. Congress, as I told you, is the name of the American Parliament. In fact, Indian Congress, the Congress Party, borrowed their name from this institution in America. It will be having two houses: bicameral Congress, House of Representatives, where each state is represented according to its population. This is what Virginia plan wanted. And then there will be a Senate, something compared to Rajya Sabha, you can say. Each state shall have two senators, which the New Jersey plan wanted. Now, this is the system which India also follows, except for the fact that in here, the upper house does not have a fixed number of seats. Here, the representation in upper house in India is based again on the population of states. This you shall study and learn in your polity part, how the election to Rajya Sabha is done. Now, slave issues were there. Slave population was in southern state. It was huge, and northern states had issues with it because they, more number of people living in southern states because of the slaves, and representation will matter. Now, remember, House of Representative is to have a representation based on population. And when entire slaves are living in southern part, they will have more population, which in turn will translate into more representation in the House of Representatives. Okay, so this is the issues that the northern states had. And finally, before the Civil War occurred, it was decided that not all slaves, it's not there in the slides, just listen to it, that not all slaves will have the voting rights. 3 out of 5 slaves will have voting rights because the slaves are very much in number and they are all in the southern states. More population means more representation in House of Representatives, and they will outnumber the northern states. So out of every 5 slave, only 3 slave will be having the voting right. This is what Americans did. Now the Civil War started. It started in 61, lasted till 65. It is also known as war between brothers, between North and South states. More than 3,000 battles were fought More than 7 lakh Americans died, 15 lakh were injured and displaced. The biggest challenge to the integration of America. It was said that the USA's United, is removed. They declared independence in 1776, uh, tried to create a new constitution in 1789, and Washington became the first president. Some states accepted the constitution, but not the union. There are reasons for the same. There were mutual rivalries between the states. Northern and southern states were geographically and economically different. Social inequality was prevalent in those states. The cohesiveness was absent. Northern states were not in favor of slavery. They wanted a workforce where people worked and were paid. So they were assigning some dignity to labor. On the other hand, southern states relied heavily on slaves because of dominance of agriculture. They said if we start giving, you know, payment as per work, then we won't be able to sustain ourselves because we are a agricultural driven economy. So northern state also were not in favor of any state having a right to secede, that you can break away from the union. Southern states wanted it. So these were the main contentious issues between the northern and southern states in America. See the slave trade. These are the newspaper cuttings of that time. A very slang was used for the slaves, Negroes. American Civil War started. Abraham Lincoln came from northern state. Again, he will start a propaganda against the slave trade. He campaigned strongly against slavery and won the 1860 elections. So naturally, the southern states are not liking him because he is against slaves. Carolina secedes from Federation, and subsequently 7 more states secede from the American Federation, and they established CSA. So on the one hand, there was USA, United States of America. Then there were this CSA, Confederate States of America. This is they are breaking away from America because of the slavery issue. They want to have slaves, whereas USA does not want to have slave, led by Abraham Lincoln. Now, 4 more states joined the Confederation and they attacked the northern states on 12th of April 1861, and thus starts the American Civil War between northern states and southern states, mainly on the issue of slaves. Then in 1803, France sells Louisiana to America. It's a land piece which was sold to America by France. Now, will it be a free state or a slave state? Because both were claiming it. There was a Missouri Agreement which decided that any geography was the factor here. Any new state which joins the Union, 36 degrees line in northern hemisphere, anything above it would be a free state. Anything below 36 degrees line in northern hemisphere would be a slave state. So again, the movement started. William Lloyd Garrison started a newspaper called Liberator, and as the name suggests, it was against slavery. Anti-slavery societies were formed. There was a novel, a very famous novel, 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and it talked about the plight of slaves, the inhumane conditions into which they are living. This novel was a bestseller in North, and it was banned in South. Here's the Uncle Tom's Cabin. It talks about it. It erased the slavery issue, became a bestseller in northern states, and was banned in southern states. Finally, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 was brought. Slavery can be decided by popular sovereignty. What does it mean? That irrespective of the state you belong to, whether you are north or south, if people within a state want to have slavery, they shall have slavery. So, suppose there are 10 northern states and granted a slave state status because sovereignty will decide, which means in terms of deciding upon slavery Senator Douglas, the Democratic Party senator, started this debate, and Republicans abolished slavery. Abraham Lincoln becomes the leader of Republicans. James Brown says we should give weapons to slaves so that they can liberate themselves, and he turns anti-slavery into a military movement. He is arming the slaves. Dred Scott episode happened. Dred Scott versus Stanford was a famous case in the Supreme Court of USA. Now, Slaves were considered so inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Slavery can be allowed in other states. This is what the American Supreme Court said. Slavery became legal, the southern state became happy, and slaves started carrying placards with the message that I'm not a man. They were playing victim. In fact, they were victim. They were not playing victim. Victim. It's unfair to say that if someone is slave, he's playing victim. But they wanted to convey this message that see, we have been discriminated against. I'm not a man. I'm not a human. Now, Kansas, Nebraska turns into a slave state, and then this presidential election, Douglas is pitted against Lincoln from Democratic Party and Lincoln from the Republican Party, and Lincoln wins the election without a single vote from southern states. By this time, Confederate States of America is having 11 states. USA is having 23 states. Be uh, don't इसमें परेशान होने वाली बात नहीं है. It started as 13 states. This is what we have learned. But with passage of time, more areas joined either CSA or USA. So by this time, there are 11 states in CSA and 23 USA. I'm referring to 1860s. Again, South Carolina leaves the Union, and the American press highlights it as the dissolution of Union. 1861, seven more states leave Union, and Jefferson Davis becomes the president of Confederate State. He makes slavery legal. And then again on 1861, 12th of April, the southern states attacked their northern counterparts, and the first shot was fired at Fort Sumter. So these were the blue ones on your screen are the northern states. The south ones, the red ones are the southern states. The horizontal, the checkered ones are the free states. The entire map is the current USA. Finally, General Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox in April 1861 and thus ends the war. You see the surrender picture, the newspaper clippings here. So this is how the war ended. American Civil War, as we saw, started after the American War of Revolution, and it taught many things to humanity. It taught many things to the other countries. And how did first we need to see that how did Americans won this war against the British? There are reasons for it that from the very beginning the British authorities did not attach much importance to the revolutionary effort of the Americans, and they relied on British soldiers to suppress them. British authorities also failed to rally a loyalist American. Okay, they could not take care of it. Americans had a fierce spirit of liberty, which was driving them that they want to emerge victorious. George Washington showed some extraordinary military leadership, and it defeated the English. So these were the main reasons because of which Americans won, and on top of it, the French and the Dutch they helped the Americans. And as I told you, that Louis XVI sent General Lafayette to help the Americans. And American Revolution exerted a radical influence on France, and many French idealists actively collaborated with the Americans. So American independence was a great blow to the invincible image of Great Britain. Of course, English took their colonial lessons from this. They implemented it in India and elsewhere where they were ruling. So this is the story of America, the spirit that the American spirit, the great American spirit, as it is often called as. First world written constitution comes here. The democracy was established. The federation was established. Nationalism was ushered in. Imperialism was defeated. This is the significance. The revolution and further the civil war, which united the entire country. And today it is the most advanced and the most developed country on this earth. So that's the story. I shall take your questions one by one. Take good care. We'll see more of it in the coming sessions. Goodbye.